Hey guys, this is Hardy from Digital Painting Studio. Today let's talk about brushes. Obviously something very important, very central to digital painting. And I'm going to jump around a little bit in this one. It will be part tutorial. I want to share the main technique that I'll be using in this painting that will take shape in the background while we're chatting. But I also want to get into what brushes can and can't do for your development as a digital painter. And I think some of this may surprise you. So lots to dig into with this one, all things brushes. Now, it's probably the most commonly asked question between digital artists. What brush are you using? What are your settings? So first of all, my brush pack is available for free. So if you want to use these, you can grab them in our Discord freebies channel. And while there's no magic brush, which is actually kind of the point, the message of this video, the right brush really can make a meaningful difference in how you paint, even how you think, and how you approach art. When I watch a digital painting video, I always wish I could ask the artist everything about their brush. So here it is. For most of the rendering, the skin tones, even a lot of the helmet that I'll do later in this process, I'm just using a standard round brush. It's pretty much the most uninteresting brush in the Photoshop drawer. I have pen pressure set to size jitter. So when I press lightly, the marks get smaller, and when I really hammer down, the marks get bigger. That's the only jitter that I have enabled. There's no opacity or transfer, there's no texture, and the brush is in normal mode. So other than occasionally smudging to give a little bit of brushy texture, there's nothing at all special going on with this brush. And this is the one that I use 90% of the time, at least during these initial steps. But here's the trick to this. I'm keeping flow and opacity really low, usually around 20 or 30%. And I'm tapping the stylus repeatedly. I must tap 1,000,000 times per painting. Just watch how fast my history panel fills up with brush tool, brush tool. And that's the key. We are tapping repeatedly with low flow and opacity so that we can build up tones very slowly, very gradually. And that slow crawl toward a desired value in color gives you control. You can simply make it what you want it to be slowly. And that control is what makes this very vanilla brush into something insanely powerful. It just lets you slow things down so that they can develop the way you want them to. Now, pen pressure controlling brush size is really important because it lets me control edges. If I want a really hard edge, I just tap very lightly and let those small marks needle into small places and really carve out a sharp jump from light to dark. You can even adjust the hardness of this brush with keyboard shortcuts. You hold down Shift and use the bracket keys, so you might see me quickly jump from a hard-edged brush to something really airbrushy and back and forth. Now, just because I'm mostly using the round brush doesn't mean that's the only brush that I ever use. There are lots of brushes that I start breaking out closer to the end of a project when I want to start adding texture and expressiveness. But let's talk about digital brushes in general, what they can do for you and what they can't. Let's talk about the good first. Most of all, brushes are fun. They can make you excited to get into a digital painting, and that's huge. If you find some shiny, cool new effect that you just fall in love with, that can really keep you in. It can keep that inspiration fire burning. And brushes can add texture and expressiveness. So One of the baked-in challenges of digital art is that everything tends towards being overly smooth and clean, and it's easy to get results that just look sterile and lifeless, right? It's that Photoshoppy look that you can spot a mile away. Sometimes a good brush with some subtle texture or irregularity jittered into it can give your digital art just a little extra flavor and charm. In fact, I would say that the best digital brushes are the ones that make you forget you're even using a computer. I have a brush that really feels like a pencil. That's my favorite one to sketch with. I have a brush that feels like a marker. I love that one for loose tonal passes on a concept. So they're rare, but they do exist. Those really finely tuned brushes that just make the app disappear. For the most part, the brush that you make or at least fine tune yourself ends up working the best for you. Now let's talk about the bad, the downside of digital brushes, what brushes can't do, and how in some cases they can actually hurt more than they help. First of all, they just aren't ever as magical as we had hoped they would be, right? Every brush pack that I've ever bought and paid money for has disappointed me. If I'm being totally real with you, the free brushes that I'm offering you in this very video, they'll be fun and interesting. They might even bring a little something extra to your work, but they won't be magic. They won't turn your work into some instant simulation of an oil painting or a watercolor. They won't simulate charcoal perfectly, and they won't magically make good art. And I know that you know that. You know that when you download brush packs, it's not an instant fix. But I point this out so that brushes don't become a crutch or a shiny shortcut. They never just seem to quite deliver on their promise. In fact, the weird contradiction with digital brushes is that if an artist relies on them too much, they have this weirdly opposite effect of what was intended. Instead of making paintings that look painterly and expressive and artful, they end up just looking like weird digital noise. In my experience, and this is definitely just one artist's opinion, if you see a pack of brushes promising to perfectly simulate some traditional medium, you're usually going to end up with a canvas full of noise. And I'm sure there are awesome exceptions out there. So use those fun, brushy brushes sometimes. They can really do fun and often amazing things for your paintings. But my advice is to make sure that they are a small accent to your work. They're not like the center of the work itself. The artfulness, the expressiveness, that can't be found within an ABR file. It comes from what your hand does when holding that stylus. I've used the words artfulness and expressiveness a few times already, and that's actually the idea that I want to leave you with. Those things should really be the goal. And if a fun textured brush helps you get there, that's awesome, go for it. But one final thought I want to leave you with, and I hope this changes your work as much as it changed mine. So, I realized something about my own work years ago that really changed everything for me, and it was all about detail and brushes. So when this story starts, I was a younger, ambitious artist determined to break into this competitive concept art world. And I decided that I was going to do that by being the hardest working artist ever. I used to put hundreds of hours into a single painting. I used to painstakingly polish the tiniest, most irrelevant detail on the canvas with a 1-pixel brush. And I can even remember what I was thinking at the time. If I just put maximum effort and maximum time into everything that I paint, then it has to be great, right? Well, not really. First of all, this approach just completely burned me out, and it would have been totally unfeasible for a professional project since no one would ever give you a 6-month deadline for a single painting. But more importantly than any of that, the work itself, the end result, kind of sucked. With all of this relentless detailing and relentless polishing, I ended up rendering everything to death. I have a portfolio from my early break-in attempts into concept art, and it's completely lifeless. It's pointless. It's detailed as hell, like you can see the effort, but all of that kind of amounts to a big, so what? How can that be? The answers to this depressing and seemingly unsolvable problem came slowly, but it all started when I began to notice that literally all of my favorite artists seem to have something in common. Their work looked effortless. It looked like they had just slapped it onto the canvas in maybe 2 hours. There were visible brushstrokes. Paintings looked messy or even incomplete in parts. And it was all still just undeniably gorgeous. It created these powerful emotional connections. It told cool stories. I mean, what sorcery is this? How could my art heroes achieve more in a handful of hours than I could in a semester? Now, more than a decade later, I'm finally starting to make some peace with this and arrive at a sort of answer, and brushiness is at the core of it. These beautiful works that my art heroes were making weren't gorgeous in spite of their looseness. They were gorgeous because of it. And that led me to realize that too much detail can kill a painting. If you find yourself just lost in the pixels, zooming into 300%, or spending way too long on a painting, as painful as this can be to realize, that painting is probably dead already. And here's where we tie all this back to brushes. We need to leave parts of every painting loose and brushy. In fact, I would say that any part of your painting that isn't a main focal point, that should be as loose as you can possibly get away with. So at the end of every painting, after I've done the hard technical work of adding detail to the focal points, of rendering things to feel realistic and three-dimensional, when the colors are doing what I want them to do, that's when I start reaching for those wacky brushes. And of course, we're working digitally. You are risking nothing. Just do this on a new layer, and you can try any crazy brushy thing that you want to. Think of it as raking your fingers across a finished oil painting while the paint's still wet. Just mess it up, break something. Leave your focal points intact, but let everything else just turn into an impression, a brushy, textured area that's nothing more than a vague mood. If you can walk this fine line, it does two amazing things for your work. First of all, it makes your viewer pay attention to the focal point. Our eyes tend to seek out detail, so we can use that. Let's reserve detail just for the parts of painting that we want our viewers to focus on. For this one, it's definitely the eye. Hopefully that's where your focus lands in the first few seconds you see this painting. The other magic trick that this approach achieves is that it lets the viewer connect some dots for themselves. If you detail everything to death, there really isn't anything for your viewer to do. There's no room for them to make their own impression about your work. But if you make your image mostly loose and brushy with a few areas of detail, your viewer kind of gets invited into the process. They get to decide how to finish things. It's like we're just suggesting our work rather than force feeding it to them. And when you can do that, when you can leave room for your viewer and let them fill in that detail for themselves, it makes it all feel more real and more personal for them. It becomes a sort of a relationship, like a conversation rather than me just yelling. So this is super philosophical and abstract, but this single idea, more than anything else, is what has just set my work free. And I would say that my early career breaks really coincided with this change. So I'm pretty convinced that this can make any image not only more fun and more expressive and just easy, but also more appealing, more marketable. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you enjoy the brushes linked in the description. With the right mindset and with open eyes about what brushes can and can't do, these can really be powerful tools and can make digital painting more fun and more satisfying. See you in the next video. In the meantime, good luck with your artwork. Paint something cool today.